As a child and teenager, I was ordinary. Not very athletic, so although I ran cross-country, I never received any awards or athletic respect from my peers. I received average grades because I always thought that I had average intelligence. And, of course, average motivation. I had an average number of friends, both men and women, and lived in an average house with average family members. Even my name is common, Joe Johnson. No one, neither I nor my family members, could have imagined that such an ordinary guy like me would have two insights. But it happened. My first insight happened when I was 14. I read an article about what, on the one hand, a genius, and on the other hand, a rotten incompetence. Bobby Fischer, perhaps the greatest mercantile American chess grandmaster, was, and suddenly became interested in chess. Although I always thought I was of average intelligence, at least when it came to chess, I discovered that I was actually quite smart and intuitive. Besides, I read everything I could get my hands on about chess strategy. Joined the school chess club. I started participating in local tournaments, first associated with my junior school, then at a summer camp. Long story short, by the time I was 18 and a senior in high school, I was really good. In fact, I was so good at chess that I received a chess scholarship to college. Most people probably don't even know that there are several dozen colleges in the United States that offer full chess scholarships. So even with my grades just above average, chess helped me in some subjects, especially math. I got a full scholarship to a decent college. Believe it or not, there are actually chess fans, at least something like that. My fame in my hometown due to my chess game actually caused some girls in school and nearby communities to become acquainted with me. One of these, at least semi-groupings, a few months after my 18th birthday, led to my second epiphany. Her name was Denise. She went to the local Catholic girls' school. She wasn't particularly beautiful. None of the chess fans I'd ever seen were, but she wasn't ugly either. In fact, she had very beautiful legs, which I saw when she competed in a gymnastics competition at the same camp where I taught chess the summer before her senior year. I liked her at summer camp, but I didn't take any action until the school year started. During the school year, I encountered Denise several times in situations that I believed were a setup. I debated whether or not to take advantage of her attention, while my hormones began to bubble, and within a few weeks, but most likely a few months, my voice became rougher, and my appearance also changed slightly. At Saturday's away rapid chess tournament, Dennis accidentally happened to be nearby. After it was all over, I won, quite easily. I didn't even have to play the last match. She offered to give me a ride home. I agreed, and told my coach, and the teammates I came with that I would see him on Monday. On the way back, Denise's flirting took things to a higher level, including, innocently, lifting her skirt almost to her knickers as she drove. As I said, she had excellent legs. I agreed to pick her up at home that evening to go to the movies, and we kissed sweetly before I got out of her car. I thought this could be my lucky night. It turned out to be much more successful than I thought. When I came to Denise, she was dressed very provocatively. More provocative than I thought was appropriate for a movie. That's when I learned that her parents weren't home and wouldn't be home for at least 4 hours. After that, she came up to me and kissed me on the lips. The reaction was immediate. Although I was a virgin myself, it was clear that Denise was not a virgin. Soon we were both naked. Again, long story short, I had my first sex that evening. She tried hard to get me going for round 2, but despite my enthusiasm, I was a throwaway. However, we had some very nice, relaxed pillow talk, and I found that I enjoyed stroking and kissing her. When I left Denise's house 3.5 hours after my arrival, she made me promise that we would meet again, the most fervent promise I had ever made in my life. While Denise assured me that I had satisfied her with the enthusiasm and curiosity that I had previously only experienced in chess, I decided that I wanted to become an incomparable lover. In the end, after Denise, I was sure that this was not a long-term relationship. I would be competing with jocks, big-faced men and guys, so I had to have some kind of hook that would give a competitive advantage. Once Denise proclaimed me the sex god of all time and shamelessly declared that, although she still dates and has sex with other guys, I am by far the best. I began to look for new horizons. Denise and I didn't really love each other, although we couldn't have sex on average almost 3 times a week without falling in love. She wanted our status as fuck buddies to continue into college, but luckily her parents wouldn't pay for her to go to college where I had a scholarship, so we broke up when the summer ended. After entering college between my first 3 years, Denise and I only dated a few times over the summer, and although it was fun, and she proclaimed me even more skillful than in high school, by then I was already looking for a long-term commitment with someone who I would love. I was saddened that there were very few female chess fans in college. In addition, the competition for beautiful women was very strong, especially since in the average beauty's mind, I was not a stud. I had no obvious muscle tone, I wasn't in the top 25% in looks, I wasn't rich, and while I was a nice guy, I didn't have irresistible charm. However, what I lacked in attractiveness and charm, I made up for in luck and motivation. Although I had more than my fair share of satisfying sexual experiences during my first 2 years of college, the girls I had sex with were not exceptionally beautiful. Nor were they the type to brag or even advertise that we had sex. Everyone really wanted our relationship to continue, but I became more and more interested in finding a girlfriend and possible wife rather than a sex buddy. Towards the end of my junior year, I decided to implement a plan that I had been preparing for several months. The woman I was interested in, her name was Dolores, was a real sexy beauty. I often thought I was fooling myself into thinking I had any hope of getting back together with her, given the guys she was dating, and I knew the only chance I had was to get her into bed and stun with sexual prowess. However, Dolores had a friend and sorority sister named Bernice, who was as loose and gossipy as any woman I had ever met in my life, and although she was good-looking, she was not in that unattainable category, as is Dolores. I met Bernice through friends and 2 classes we took together during the first semester of my junior year. I got lucky when I was at an outdoor party with male friends, and she and her date got drunk and had a public fight. As she was running away from him, I intercepted her, told her he was a complete moron, and asked if she needed a ride home. She gratefully agreed, and on the way to the car, in a drunken stupor, she bumped into me several times, in keeping with her uninhibited nature, which was undoubtedly enhanced by the drink. She brought up many racy topics on the way to her apartment. One of them was especially surprising. It sounded something like this. One girl who dated you said that you had some wonderful hidden talents. Was she just pouting, or are you really a hidden male? I don't know who you're talking about, I smiled, actually quite surprised because I didn't think that any of my companions were talking about me with the other girls. Her name is Melissa or Miranda or something like that. She was drunk as hell at some party, and I walked in on her while some guy was licking her, and she was berating him for not being even 1/10 as good as Joe Johnson. Maybe it was another Joe Johnson, I said with a wide, white-toothed smile, which interested her very much. Again, long story short, I showed Bernice my talents that night before she passed out. The next day, Bernice showed up in my dorm room. Having practically kicked out my neighbor, she said in her inimitable, relaxed manner, "We had sex last night before I passed out, or was I dreaming?" "It looks like there really was something," I smiled. "I want to know if this is real. Can't you come to me tomorrow night and do it again while I'm sober?" "I don't know, Bernice. I like you, but I'm not interested in a long-term relationship, and I don't want you to have the wrong opinion. Plus, if I suddenly want to date one of your sorority sisters, I don't want you to be crazy about me, or for her to turn me down just because I slept with you." "Listen, dumbass," she snorted. "I don't want a relationship with you either, and I won't stop you from dating one of my sisters if she's stupid enough to want to date you. I just want to see if sex with you sober is as good as my foggy memory says it is." "What time should I appear tomorrow?" I asked with a very wide grin. "At 8 o'clock, but I have a test the next day. So you'll have to leave at 10 if you last that long," she chuckled, now smiling at herself, although it was a devilish smile. "So, at 8, I grinned. The next day I tried to finish all my schoolwork, had an early dinner, and did some language exercises. This was my chance to get on Dolores's radar, and I didn't want to miss it. I arrived at Bernice's at 8 o'clock in the evening. When she greeted me, I took the initiative and picked her up, French kissing her, making sure she noticed my muscular tongue, over 8.5 centimeters long with a sharp tip, and carried her to the bedroom. I attacked her with force, not even bothering to take off her top or my clothes. I tried as hard as I had ever tried in my life until that moment. I lay there and hugged her, then got dressed, wrote her a note, and left. I had a lot of fun. She was as supportive and appreciative a partner as I've ever had, so even if it didn't work out as part of my plan, I was very glad I had the experience. The next day, I was sitting in the student union talking to 2 male and 1 female friends when Bernice approached me. She looked unkempt and agitated and walked on her toes, which is not typical for her. She ordered the 3 I was with to leave and then sat down next to me. "Because of you, it seems I failed my world history test today," were her first cheerful words. "Like this?" I asked. "You drove me crazy last night, even though I told you I had to study for a test. Couldn't you stop?" "No, damn it, I couldn't stop. By the way, sex with you is really interesting." Bernice smiled and then laughed. "When can we do this again? On Friday or Saturday night, just not when I have classes the next morning." "Why not on both Friday and Saturday?" I answered. Bernice thought for a moment. "Friday for sure, and let me work on canceling my plans on Saturday." I actually stayed at her apartment on a Friday night and found that under favorable circumstances my recharge time was about 5 hours. So I actually had sex not only on Friday night but also early on Saturday morning. Luckily, I didn't have much to do during the day on Saturday because I had to sleep during the day to recuperate and prepare for Saturday night, which was almost a repeat of Friday night, until about 3 o'clock on Sunday morning, we could no longer continue. Over the next week, I received more smiles from pretty women when I passed by on breaks or during class than I ever had in my life. Among them was Dolores. After 3 more marathon sessions with Bernice over 3 weekends and continued smiles from women across campus. Before another Friday meeting, Bernice and I had a heart-to-heart on a bench in a secluded part of campus. "Joe, I want to tell you something that you might not like. Since I'm so distracted by sex with you, I'm able to get multiple B's this semester for the first time." "Have you never gotten a B in college before?" I asked, quite surprised. I knew Bernice was smart, but given her personality and sexuality, I never thought she would make the dean's honor list. "Forget about college. I've never gotten a B in my entire life. Despite my promiscuity, I am a serious student and want to graduate from college with honors. So I have to cool it down with you. I'm only a session or 2 away from graduating college while I work on improving my grades in world history and astronomy." Astronomy was known as one of the most difficult subjects at the School of Liberal Arts. I was surprised she took it at all, let alone plan to pass it with flying colors. "Now that we're being frank, Bernice, let me tell you what I want. I want a relationship with Dolores McHugh. I want you to help me install them. If you do this, I'll be happy to have 2 more dates with you, because that's what they will be. Before the end of the semester, at a time and place of your choosing. Otherwise, we're done right now." "You're a petty blackmailer," she chuckled. "No blackmail, just a negotiator," I grinned. 5 days later, Bernice and I met on the same bench. "You really ruined my life, asshole," she growled, though by now I knew her well enough to know that the growl was false. "Like this?" I asked. "I got you a date with Dolores at the expense of my conscience and pride, that's how it is." She snorted again. "How come I don't understand again?" I asked, this time with a smile. "I started a fight between her and that asshole football player she's dating, told her that you've worn me out so much, and that if she wants to loosen up and just have great sex, she should go on a date with you." How can I ask her out on a date out of the blue? I even choked, I was so amazed. "I arranged that too. Told her that I had a date with you at an off-campus dance party on Saturday night, and that we agreed that you would pick me up at the sorority house. I told her that when you get there I will stage an incident in my family, she will be nearby, and if you look disappointed, she will offer to go instead of me." I even got you tickets to the dance party, idiot, Bernice said with a smile, taking 2 tickets out of her bag. I put the tickets in my pocket and kissed her with a passionate tongue. Let me know when you want to be served and I'll give you the time of your life, I grinned. You've already given me the time of my life. I just want 2 more 2-hour ones. And that's the maximum. Sessions with you. I will tell you the dates and you will come, even if you have a conflict with Dolores. Understand? Understood, I laughed. The preparatory part of the date with Dolores went perfectly. Bernice put on a good performance about family troubles. I feigned disappointment while she cried, and Dolores happened to walk by with perfectly applied makeup and perfect hair, but in casual clothes. Bernice volunteered for her. I told Dolores, "Are you really going? I don't want to lose expensive tickets." And Dolores replied, "Okay, but I need to change." And 4 minutes later, she came down the stairs, perfectly dressed for the dance party. On the way to the dance party, Dolores and I had a nice chat. She was very pleasant to talk to, as well as beautiful and sexy, like no other woman I had ever seen. We had a good time at a dance party. I can dance and she dances well, and there were people we both knew there. Even though Dolores hadn't had much to drink, she seemed tipsy when we left. I suspected that this was a performance, which was confirmed when we headed back to campus. Dolores unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned closer to me. "You're not one to take advantage of a poor, helpless drunk girl, are you, Joe?" she said with a completely slurred speech. No, Dolores. Besides, even if I was a jerk, your dorm and my dorm room wouldn't work." "Thank God you're not a bore," she muttered even more slurredly, "because Bernice left town on family business and gave me the key to her apartment. Can we stop by for a second on the way home so I can feed her cat?" I knew full well that Bernice didn't have a cat. "Of course," I answered, and quickly drove to Bernice's house. Dolores fumbled with the key, could not insert it, and finally handed it to me with the words, "Try it. I'm too drunk." I opened the door. She walked around saying, "Hey, kitty, kitty," until she accidentally bumped into me. I kissed her. She kissed back. "I'm helpless. I can't fight you. Please don't use me," she muttered, kissing me. This was clearly an invitation. I picked her up while she still pressed her lips to mine, laid her gently on Bernice's bed, which she had kindly provided with clean sheets, especially for this occasion, and, continuing to kiss, removed her panties without any resistance on her part. In fact, she slightly raised her ass to make my task easier. As we lay in euphoric glory with her head on my shoulder on Bernice's bed, a thought flashed through my mind. It was the best sex of my life. When we arrived at her sister's house, before getting out of the car, she turned to me and said, "It was the best sex of my life. Moreover, I really like you, Joe. Is there a possibility for a relationship? Does a one-legged duck swim in circles? Does Dolly Parton sleep on her back? Is a frog's butt waterproof?" I grinned. I probably would have continued with stupid metaphors, but she interrupted me. "That's enough. I understand everything," Dolores laughed. "Pick me up at 7 on Tuesday evening for a student concert, and maybe something else." She giggled, closing the door. I think she heard me say, "Definitely," before the car door closed. She waved and ran up the steps of the women's house. Things went better with Dolores than I could have expected. By the time summer arrived, we had sex in 10 different places on campus, 3 nights in motel rooms, and another night in Bernice's apartment. I didn't show the slightest interest in other women, didn't even look at any more, except to keep my promise to Bernice and get 2 more sessions before I graduated from college. I was so grateful to Bernice that I gave her my all on both occasions, even though I felt guilty for cheating on Dolores, even though we had made no promises of exclusivity to each other at the time. Bernice must have done well too, because she graduated as the top graduate of the School of Arts and Sciences. As a graduation gift and thank you, I gave her a Mont Blanc pen in an engraved holder that said, "Thank you, Bernice, for being the smartest, most selfless, sexy woman on the planet. Love, Joe." Opening her gift, she shed tears and hugged me. Wiping away a tear, she asked, "What are the chances of other sessions? since I will be working only 100 miles from you? While I'm with Dolores, nothing, I grinned. But of course I will never forget you. I guess I'm too selfless, she chuckled, then kissed me and disappeared to meet her parents. In the summer between my 3rd and 4th years, I didn't have any sessions with anyone other than Dolores. I spent 2 weekends at Dolores's house, a mansion actually, while her parents were in Europe, and she visited my parents' little humble abode once, although we had to get a motel room to do what we wanted. During my senior year, I turned down a chess scholarship and worked part-time, saving enough money from summer jobs and winning professional chess tournaments that I could easily pay my senior year's tuition. This was also possible because Dolores and I rented an apartment together, which was paid for by her parents, and I shared food costs with her and paid for most of our social events. It wasn't until I visited Dolores's parents' mansion that I realized how rich they were. Obviously, they had megabucks. Although Dolores was their only daughter and they gave her all the material things she wanted, they were not emotionally involved in her life. They only visited her once in college, our senior year, which forced me to hide all my stuff in closets or friends' apartments for the 2 days. They were there. She introduced me to them as her boyfriend. But they were not very warm towards me. However, the coldness of her parents was the only trouble throughout her senior year. In fact, what was very important to Dolores, sex and love, only intensified. We declared our love for each other daily and had sex in one form or another almost every day when she didn't have her period, and one day almost every weekend was spent completely in bliss. There were 2 small problems. First, she spent a lot of money, her parents, on clothes, cosmetics, spa treatments, and anything else she wanted. Secondly, if she drank, she would tell her friends, often in front of me, about what a sex god I was. I hoped she didn't do the latter because she had to justify to them why a goddess like her would date a guy who was out of her league in looks. When I asked her about this, she assured me that that was not the case. However, this resulted in many of her friends either giving me glances or giving me wary looks, which I didn't like. The logical continuation of our romance was the wedding we had 2 months after graduating from university, when we both got decent jobs in the same city. It was a simple civil ceremony, as her parents refused to participate in it, since, in their opinion, she was clearly marrying a man below her, especially since I was not mega-rich, and she rejected their attempts to set her up with the sons of their rich friends. At least her brothers came to the reception. One, Anthony, was a great guy, and the other, Jonathan, seemed to suffer from his time there. Because Dolores did not have a close emotional relationship with her parents, she never seriously considered giving in to their wishes, but she acknowledged that it would be difficult for her to give up the shopping, spa visits, and other amenities that their wealth provided. Because as soon as we got married, they stopped all financial support. "I can handle it," she said just before the wedding, shrugging her shoulders. "Besides, you already have enough fashionable clothes to last you a decade," I assented in response. "Yes, I don't need anything else," she sighed. Then she brightened up and giggled. "Besides, I plan to spend a lot of time naked." We started our married life very happily. The first 3 years progressed in our careers as much as could be expected. We moved from an apartment to a townhouse. We had a good circle of friends our age. We stayed physically active, me by running and weightlifting, she by the gym, and, incredibly, the sex got even better, although we only had fully hedonistic days once a month rather than once a week, like in college. Dolores then reconnected with Jane Britton, the woman with whom she had her debut party when she was 18, who persuaded her to join the local junior league. The junior league does a lot of good charitable things. However, at least in our metropolitan area, almost all of its members were women who were themselves rich or had obscenely rich husbands. Dolores and a few others are the only exceptions. More than a third of them were trophy wives, significantly younger than their megabuck husbands. Being surrounded by such wealth, including when Dolores alone or both of us attended fundraisers or meetings at one mansion or another, Dolores developed a newfound love for material things. She started spending too much money, practically everything we earned. When she began to resort to our modest savings, we had our first big fight. Although our quarrel was truly loud, neither of us harbored a grudge. We were back to normal after one of our hedonistic all-day sex sessions, during which she was even more energetic and responsive than usual. Later that week, she came to me with an unexpected proposal. "Joe, I realize I can't spend our money like water, and I'm really going to slow down. However, my two junior league friends truly value my companionship and are willing to pay for my shopping trips to New York, spa days, and other activities. I wanted you to know about this so that you don't think that I'm being reckless by going to different places with them." "What do they want in return?" was my incredulous answer. "They just need my friendship. Is it really so difficult to understand?" she said in a sweet voice, coming up to me and placing quick, soft kisses on my neck, cheeks, and lips. "No. I also appreciate your communication. It is priceless. But what will their husbands say about them spending money on you? Jane and Amy's husbands are so rich and willing to do anything for their trophy wives that this isn't even the smallest problem. What they spend on me is less than a blip on the radar." After thinking about it, I realized it was true. From my interactions with Jane and Amy at Junior League and other social events, I knew that their husbands idolized them, and both of them were on the list of the top 200 richest Americans. "Okay, no need to worry," I replied with a shrug. After our little conversation between me and Dolores, there were no more problems with money. However, something else has changed. We began to communicate more with Jane and Amy, sometimes with their husbands, sometimes without, and Jane and Amy began to seriously flirt with me. It was getting a little revealing and uncomfortable, especially with Amy. In some ways, Amy was the epitome of a trophy wife. She was 29 years old, better looking than any fashion model, had a regal bearing but a friendly disposition, and was married to Wilton Braxton, a man in his 70s who ranked 35th on the last list I saw of the richest Americans. Amy was the only woman I'd ever seen in my life who looked better than Dolores, and she was almost religious about maintaining her appearance, including working out with a personal trainer 5 days a week. Amy was also the most charitable person I have ever met. She raised money tirelessly, especially for battered women, child poverty, and children with serious illnesses. And when not exercising, socializing, shopping, or going to a resort, she worked constantly and with great energy for charities. If there wasn't enough money in a fundraiser, Wilton Braxton was happy to make up the difference because it seemed like making Amy happy was his greatest joy in life. After a particularly flirtatious encounter with Amy in a den at one of the mansions where a social event was taking place, during which she seemed to pretend to be drunk, I decided it was time to talk to Dolores about it. The next day, after a nice brunch and a wonderful morning of sex, I sat Dolores down on our patio. "Darling, there is one delicate topic that I must address to you." "What is it, dear?" she asked with a smile. "I don't know how to say this other than bluntly, but Amy Braxton and Jane Britton seem to be deliberately hitting on me every chance they get. You, of course, yourself, witnessed some comments from them. You must be flattered," Dolores replied with a grin. "Well, maybe not entirely flattered," she continued with a devilish grin, "because Amy's husband can't do anything for her in the bedroom, and Jane's husband can do very little. I'm sure they're just enjoying being with a sexy guy like you." "Do you talk to them about their sex life?" I asked, very puzzled. "Of course, expensive. Women always talk about their sex life." "Do you talk to them about ours?" I asked, hesitantly. "Yes, I told them both about the many wonderful ways in which you provide me with sexual satisfaction like no other woman on the planet." I swallowed. "Do you tell them everything?" "Almost," she giggled, noticing my discomfort. "What? And what is their reaction?" "They can't get enough of the details. They envy me so much," Dolores grinned. "I really wish you wouldn't do this," I stammered. "Why not? They keep it to themselves." Are you drunk when you talk about your sex life? Sometimes, but often, especially when we go to the spa or shopping, we are sober. I think they live vicariously through me, and I am very happy to help them since they sponsor my activities, she answered without a hint of embarrassment. Seeing the suffering on my face and noticing that I was convulsively squeezing my hands, she came up to me, sat on my lap, and kissed me. I really wish you wouldn't do that again, I said between kisses. On the one hand, I don't want to offend them, but on the other, I'm a man. You know they are very attractive. Of course I do, dear. In fact, Amy is probably the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, and Jane isn't too far behind. But I know you can handle this. With that, she knelt down for the second time in as many weeks. I fantasized that it was Amy. And believe it or not, when we had sex, I fantasized that it was someone else for the first time since I met Dolores. After this, Amy and Jane's flirting only intensified. Some of the comments Amy made, including to Dolores, albeit with a double meaning, were super risque. Dolores just smiled, and I sweated. One Friday evening, the situation reached a critical stage. Separately, Dolores and I were scheduled to meet Amy and Wilton, taking time off from their busy schedules right after work to attend the opening of a popular play downtown. Of course, Amy and Wilton got front row seats because they were benefactors of the theater. When I arrived, only Amy was there. She greeted me with an overly long and familiar hug. After a short conversation, my mobile phone rang. It was Dolores. "Honey, bad news. My brother Anthony's wife just called and said he was in an accident. It is not life-threatening, but she needs help with the children. I'm so upset that I'll miss the performance I can't refuse them." "Sorry to hear that, dear. How long will you be gone?" I asked, knowing that Anthony and his family live just one suburb away. "I hope it's only a few hours, but I'll really miss it." "Me too, Dolores. I'll call you to let you know when I'll be back this evening. Listen, my love, if Amy or Wilton are there, will you give them the phone?" "Okay. I love you," I replied, handing the phone to Amy. Amy and Dolores chatted for a while, with Amy saying things like, "We'll miss you," "I understand," and "We'll take care of him." Shortly after Amy handed me my cell phone, hers rang. After a short conversation during which she seemed disappointed, she handed the phone to me. "This is Wilton, Joe. He can't come either, but he wants to talk to you." "Hello, Wilton. How are you?" were my first suspicious words. "Listen, Joe, a very important business deal just came up, and I have to take my private jet to Paris within the hour. I won't be back until Sunday evening. I'm really sorry that I'll miss the show, but Amy really wants to go to it, so please join her and then go to dinner at my expense. I've been through this scenario once before, when Bernice set me up with Dolores. My antennae were up, but there was nothing I could do. Before we entered the theater, Amy noticed a couple of disappointed students at the box office who apparently had no idea that the opening night tickets would sell out or how much they would cost even if they stayed. "Wait a second, Joe, okay?" she said, kissing me on the cheek, and then walked up to the young man and woman. After chatting with them for about a minute and a half, she handed them 2 tickets, and I thought they would fall on their faces and kiss her feet. As the excited college kids followed us into the theater, I whispered to Amy, "You definitely made their evening, if not a month or a year. I can do the same for you," she said with a grin, tightly squeezing my biceps, which, since I started weightlifting, have become more than a decent size and hardness. I know I blushed and couldn't think of anything to say. The evening was more than strange. In fact, it was so strange that it was in another dimension. The acting was excellent, although Amy's constant body contact with me was distracting. Even more distracting was our conversation with 2 college kids Amy invited over during intermission. After we were introduced, the girl asked me, "Are you Amy's husband?" She answered for me. "No, my lover," she answered, winking at me. The young man responded to this remark by throwing out the wine, he was drinking and which Amy had bought for him from his nose. Luckily, we all laughed, and I quickly changed the subject. During dinner, Amy constantly ran her booted foot up and down my leg and sometimes placed her hand on my thigh. She seemed to have had at least 7 drinks during dinner and began to mangle her words. I ate almost nothing, trying my best to carry on light conversation. After dinner, as I was driving Amy home, she seemed to pass out. When we got home, she was giggling and almost incoherent. I rang the doorbell of her mansion, but there was no answer. Finally, I woke Amy up. "Amy, no one is answering in your house. The maid has a day off today," she blurted out with glassy eyes. "Do you have a key?" I asked. "Right here," she giggled, handing me her clutch. I easily found the key in her small clutch, helped her out of the car, and literally carried her to the front door, which was no easy task, up the 10 steps from the circular driveway to the ornate entryway. I positioned her against the front wall, opened the door, and led her inside. I walked in first, helping her when she stumbled behind me. Suddenly, she straightened up, closed the door, and leaned, her back against it. She took out her mobile phone and pressed the button. She seemed unexpectedly happy about this. "What's happening?" I asked. "Your wife will call you in a few seconds," Amy said with a mischievous grin. At that moment, my cell phone rang, and I answered the call, turning away from Amy. "Hello, dear," Dolores said. "Anthony's wife asked me to stay until Sunday evening because they really needed me. I hope you don't mind. I wish I could chat longer, but there's so much commotion here. Love you and can't wait for Sunday." Then she ended the call without responding in any way to my pleas. Wait, or to my question. What's going on? When I turned back to Amy, she was naked except for her high heels and a necklace of rubies and diamonds. Her beauty and sexuality took my breath away. "What?" That was the only stupid thing that came out of my mouth other than a sigh. Amy came towards me, pressing her fabulous tits against my chest and wrapping her arms around my neck. "I'm sorry you're so ignorant, Joe, but Dolores acted as a liaison. She set it all up." I was confused, but gaining some clarity. "What about Wilton?" I muttered. "Wilton has known since we got married that he can't satisfy me in the bedroom, but he wants me to be happy. As long as the guy is married, and as long as he approves of him, and as long as we're careful, he doesn't mind me having extracurricular activities. He approved of you, as his phone call to you clearly showed." I'm sure my eyes widened, and I was definitely speechless as I looked into Amy's mesmerizingly beautiful azure pupils. "You're not going to be the first guy in my life to turn me down, are you, Joe?" she asked rhetorically before sticking her tongue into my mouth. While we kissed passionately, in my brain, thoughts flashed, in no particular order. It was all set up by Dolores, probably to pay for those expensive shopping trips and spa treatments. I'm just a man. How can I refuse the most beautiful woman I have ever seen in my life, who is also cheerful and philanthropic? I must be in Bizarro's world. This doesn't happen on Earth in real life. When we broke the kiss, Amy whispered, "Let's go upstairs." "I have other plans," I snorted in response. With that, I flipped her over, knocking off one of her Christian Louboutin heels in the process. I carried her into the living room, laid her spread out like an eagle on the most expensive sofa, and then began the full treatment. While Amy lay delirious on the sofa, I picked her up and walked up the stairs until I found a room that I was sure was one of many guest rooms. I laid her on the bed, locked the door, and quickly undressed. When, after a quick dinner, which she prepared herself, since there was no maid, cook, or butler in sight, Amy and I parted on Sunday evening around 6:30. I had achieved my goal. She couldn't walk straight. I have never felt better in my life, even after the best sex sessions with Dolores. This really bothered me. "We'll be in touch," were Amy's last words as I walked out her front door. I chuckled and drove home. All the way back, my thoughts were in turmoil. What the hell was this supposed to do to my life? Will, despite her obvious approval, this ruin my life with Dolores? What should I tell Dolores? What if she comes to me for sex and I'm almost useless. I parked on the street since Dolores' car was in the driveway and was blocking the entrance to the garage, and walked through the side door of our townhousey. I must have been quiet because I heard her talking on the phony. Then I deliberately became silent and began to eavesdrop and hear Dolores giggle in an upbeat tone. Yes, I know. You thought I was exaggerating, but now you believe. There was no doubt about who she was talking to, just as there was nothing except 100% certainty that she had arranged everything. After listening for a few minutes, I quietly slipped out through the side door and noisily entered the front door. Reuniting with Dolores turned out to be much easier and more pleasant than I had imagined. She hugged me tightly, quickly kissed my neck, cheeks, and lips, and when she wasn't kissing me, she had a smile on her face. I learned that the situation with Anthony was not serious, that she was glad that I enjoyed the play, and that she hoped Amy had a good time. She didn't ask where I was, and I didn't say anything. Amy called me at work on Tuesday to say thank you. She was cheerful and cheerful. You've worn me out this week, but could we meet sometime next week to talk about setting up another connection? I think we can arrange it, I grinned in response. Then we both laughed and hung up. Despite my euphoric meeting with Amy, which clearly happened with Dolores and Wilton's blessing, I was still concerned about what this meant for the future. Over the next 2 weeks, I tried to talk to Dolores about it. Her answer was always to either please me or entice me into other forms of sex. My sex life with her was as intense as before. I was still struggling with my feelings, even after 2 more sessions with Amy over the next month that were not as long as that hedonistic weekend. But, at least in public, Amy no longer openly flirted with me, although she was always pleasant. Jane began to pester me, even in the presence of Dolores, and I knew where this would lead. I was still in a state of intense internal conflict, despite Dolores's best efforts to steer me away from any confrontation or even conversation on the subject. I doubted whether Dolores really loved me, despite the fact that she had never been so affectionate, kind, and attentive. I doubted that everything could really be as it seemed, and I doubted many other things. The anguish over this began to affect my work, and then again, a happy accident happened. I was in the yard, but not noticing Dolores. I went into the basement to do some business when the landline phone rang. Caller ID showed it was Amy. Curious enough to assuage the guilt of invading Dolores and Amy's privacy, I waited until I heard Dolores answer upstairs. Then he picked up the phone in the basement, simultaneously turning off the microphone. I don't remember exactly what was said, but what came through loud and clear was that Dolores really loved me and was very proud that she had something that all the other members of the Trophy Wives Club, that's what I called the Junior League, didn't have. A husband who can always satisfy her sexually. She was so proud of it that for some reason she didn't mind sharing me with her 2 best friends, because even though they had money and she didn't, they had no sexual satisfaction. Dolores did not express any fears that I would leave her for some other woman, because she was sure that I loved her as much as she loved me. After this telephone conversation, I essentially stopped suffering and simply steadfastly carried my burden. 3 years have passed since that phone call, which essentially ended my torment. I say essentially because although I was willing to go along with what Dolores wanted, I didn't want her to have a sexual relationship with another guy. My position was different from hers. Sharing was not in my genetic makeup. I never discussed this with Dolores specifically, but I made it clear to both Amy and Jane that I would never approve of Dolores taking a lover. I'm sure they both passed this on to Dolores, because every time I overheard any conversation between them, they told each other everything. I started to serve. That's how I think of it, and so did Jane. Jane is a sexy woman, but not in the league of Dolores or Amy. However, when it comes to sex, she is a sprinter. She is only interested in sex, and although she is pleasant, she is not very responsive or playful. Therefore, sessions with Jane every 2 weeks are relatively quick and without much difficulty. However, the nearly weekly sessions with Amy are not quick and easy. Although I try my best to suppress them, I have real feelings for Amy, although I cannot tell if she loves me. Despite the fact that she is always more than responsive and playful towards me and around me, and can enthusiastically lift my spirits more than any other woman in my life. Wilton is currently in poor health, and I wonder what will happen if he passes away soon. I clearly don't have the answers, but the situation becomes even more complicated as Dolores is now 8 months pregnant. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.